You make a bunch of noise out here, so they have peace and quiet in here. Because there's no better sound than the squeak-free guarantee from Advantech Subflooring and Advantech Subfloor Adhesive.
I'm Jake Bruton, and welcome to the UnBuild It podcast. I am joined today by one of my usual hosts, Peter Yost.
Hi, Jake.
And we're joined by a special guest who's actually technically our host, but not our host. We're in the Build Show Studios recording. We're joined by Matt Reisinger.
Yo, thanks for having me, boys.
Who I guess is technically also our boss on some level, too.
Did we invite him because he gave us such a great lunch a little bit
I think
ago?
that's why. If you buy Style Switch Barbecue for lunch, you get on the podcast.
Yeah,
there you go. What I've heard.
Note to self.
You get the authority to even invite yourself on the podcast, even if you wanted to. He could have just said, "Hey, I'm on the podcast in a little bit," if he wanted to, and we would have been like, "Okay, fine,
All right,
that
sounds
works."
good.
Bring some more of the corn casserole in with you.
Absolutely.
Corn pudding, I
Corn
think
pudding. Is it called corn pudding down here?
It's corn casserole is what we call it, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So
I think corn
okay.
pudding is a Northeast
That's
thing.
a New Hampshire thing, not a Texas thing.
I would have thought.
So good to be here.
Growing up Presbyterian, what? Lutheran. I would have thought growing up Lutheran, you would have been totally casserole friendly.
Oh, yeah.
In Pennsylvania, it's creamed corn.
Creamed corn.
Neither pudding
Okay.
nor
Are you
casserole.
from Pennsylvania originally?
My dad's side of the family.
Gotcha. That's my roots as well.
Born in Schuylkill, my dad was.
Whoa, I don't even know where that is.
I'm not
It's
sure
pretty
anybody
close to
does.
Tamaqua.
I also don't know where that is.
okay.
That is
Sounds
a
very
fantastic-
Indian. though.
Northeast of Harrisburg.
Okay, gotcha.
Woohoo! Finally.
We slaughtered some Indians there, I have a feeling. Those poor natives.
I'm gonna
Golly.
ask that you don't say we.
Well, we collectively, America.
Okay.
No one here is native unless you're Native American, is what I always say. We're all from somewhere else.
We are. Some of us come from a long way off.
Yeah, a lot of us came from a long ways off, but
No, I meant like different universes. Sir.
well, that's probably true too.
I'm talking about myself, Matt. Too.
Yeah.
So we have an interesting, a really interesting topic today that is just gonna, I think, lend itself to an easy discussion that just keeps going.
It's going to blossom.
Yeah. So we have an email question from a listener whose name is Chance. Chance, thank you for writing in.
Cool.
We try to not give last names in case they give anything away. I'm even going to delete his last name so I don't read it on accident. His question says, Morning UnBuild It podcast, and we have shortened your question a little bit, Chance. Sorry. We're getting ready to kick off the framing portion of a project, and I'm looking ahead trying to put together a pre-drywall checklist so I'm not scrambling, which I think we have all done, to put together one when the time comes for drywall. What are some of the most important items missed before drywall and the things that are easily overlooked, which I think we all are already thinking of things. And he goes on to say he's an avid consumer of the Build Show. And he has seen me Jake, talk about the drywall checklist, and he thinks that might be a good Pete's resource. And then he
he's knitted us all together here.
together.
Yeah.
And
Way to go, Chance.
he basically just says continue the great podcast, and thanks for everything that we're doing. So Chance, thank you again for your email and your question. If you guys want to send questions, again, it's questions@unbuilditpodcast.com. These are fantastic for us because they're a great lead-in, because these are great topic ideas. And this is a fantastic one because I waited way too long in my career to make an actual list to keep me from screwing stuff up. And admittedly, we have this list, and it's printed in our employee handbook, and I encourage the employees to keep the handbook in their truck so that if they ever need something out of it, it's there.
So is that going to be a Pete's resource, your list?
It can be, yes.
Cool.
And even in the last 3 weeks, I got to a job and I said, hey, have you filled out the drywall checklist? And one of my project managers went, the what?
Uh-oh.
And I was like, you've worked here for like 2 years. How
have you not looked at the list?
It's in the handbook that you signed.
Uh-oh.
Like, you know that we have that and we've used it before. And he was like, oh, yeah. I need to print that. And it was like,
That's funny.
so like, it doesn't matter if you have it, if you don't use it,
Yeah, you
or
gotta
if you
use
don't
it.
remember that it's there.
Yep.
So that can be that's the first step, right? Is having it, but remembering to use it. So let's start with just, what's the thing that you always forget? Because I have a couple.
You know, the biggest thing that I've forgotten over the years, and I think it's because I have never been a finished carpenter, but anything that has to do with blocking for finished carpenters is always something that's on the tail side of my mind. And even, like, for instance, at my own house, I realized that I didn't solid block for my toilet paper holder, and it bothered the heck out of me when I realized it. And I was like, golly, like, I have checklists, I have
That's a good
everything,
one.
but the problem, I think part of the problem was I hadn't selected what I was going to use. We ended up using a one-armed
Oh, that's
toilet
the
hanger,
worst.
which are the worst. Don't ever do those. I don't know why I did it. It was stupid.
The only way they work is
Because the
if
roll
you put
runs
'em-
around the room.
Well, the problem is there's a set screw that holds this arm horizontal, and all
Oh.
it takes is, you know, this is flexing all day long with use, and the set screw gets loose, and all of a sudden your arm is hanging off like a broken arm, and then you got to go to the garage and figure out, is this metric, is this SAE, which one is it, and then I got to fiddle with it. You can barely see it on the backside.
I'm going
to
to write that one down. I don't wanna do
Horizontal.
that
So
one.
first off, don't use single-armed toilet paper holders. But all of the bath hardware in the house really needs to be solid blocked.
Yeah.
And here's a lesson I learned along the way, which I haven't actually implemented, but I'm hoping to implement on my next project, which is I learned from Zach Detmore. Zach keeps a Foreman Craig jig in his job site trailer, which he keeps at the job. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
A Craig jig. For the listeners, it's a pocket hole, like auto pocket hole device that doesn't require the jig. It's like a machine that has an arm that comes down. He keeps it set to 3/4, like preloaded for 3/4, and he always has a bunch of 3/4 material like stocked in his trailer that he can just grab a piece, cut it to his in between stud length, and drop it on the Craig jig, and a couple pocket screws, and he gets a block made in 2 seconds.
Cool.
Yeah.
And puts it on the job. And another thing I learned as a side note from that is from Jake Bruton when I was in your job last. I don't think we've even published this video yet, but Jake, on a lot of your shower walls, is solid sheathing with a piece of leftover Advantech his entire shower wall, so that you can put a,
It's like a
Yeah,
nail,
you'll-
like
you'll
a nail
like-
base.
Peter will like this.
so that when you get older and need a grab bar in the shower, Peter, someday
He knew
you'll
where
get
I was
older.
going immediately.
Peter, someday you'll be older and you'll need this.
Note to
He's
self.
not there yet. He's not there yet, but someday you could put basically a screw in anywhere because you got a solid 3/4 wall behind your, tile backer or whatever you got. in
Yeah,
the
why
shower.
fight it with where to put the blocking? Just put a whole sheet in there. That's a
Yeah,
good
Whole
idea.
sheet in there. So those are two things that I've consistently screwed up on in the past that I need to be better at.
I will say that when we made the jump from 16 on center to 24 on center, it took one house for my cabinet guy to go, we're not doing this again. We are absolutely not mounting cabinets to 24 on center
Yeah,
walls.
that's
He was
hard.
like, either you go back to framing 16 on center, or you provide me blocking that's centered at 34 off the floor and at whatever our cabinet upper is going to
So
be.
wherever he puts a screw, you're good.
Yep. So then I don't have to hunt for anything. So that was number one, and that was like immediate. Like literally, we did one job, and he like walked up to me before they were even done mounting cabinets, and he was like, "No way, do not do that to me."
That's
again."
really good.
Uh,
I've got to piggyback on that if you don't mind.
Yeah.
At my own personal house, I've talked about this on video. I think you may know this. Peter probably doesn't, but I put a wall-hung toilet in my kid's bath, and on the other side of that wall-hung toilet is a whole bank of cabinetry. And when my cabinet guy came to install cabinets, he zinged a screw in and missed the stud, pulled the screw back out, but little did I know that was in the tank of my wall-hung toilet.
Oh.
So when I turned the water on, I thought I had a leak. Oh my gosh, my plumbing's leaking. Well, it wasn't a leak in my water lines. It was a
tank
leak
leak?
in my tank because the plastic tank had a screw in it that got pulled out. In some respects, it was better than a screw in and staying, though, because then it would have rusted and started leaking 2 years from now, which would have been even more insidious for me trying to figure out what the problem was. So we turned the water on, all of a sudden I got a can light raining water down in my foyer. Turn on the water, turn on the water. And it took me a solid, 45 minutes to figure out that it was my toilet tank. And
It
wouldn't-
only took you 45 minutes? I would have thought it was longer than that.
It would have probably been longer, but I forget who figured it out quickly. But it was only until the tank got like 2/3 full till we got to that point, right? It didn't leak right away. It had to
Yep.
fill
Wow.
up,
So it was
and then it was draining. But I learned on that job, you need to think about not just nail plates like we have needed for code for years, right? But if you miss a screw that's a 2-inch, 3-inch screw, what's beyond that nail, not just the nail plate, but in between the studs, that could be a problem for you, especially on a cabinet wall. And so now any wall hung toilet for us, we go ahead and get a piece of, I want to say it's 20 gauge, maybe it's 22 gauge sheet metal made.
Nice.
That we put behind our wall hung toilet, so you're going to resist the screw penetration in those locations. So that's a standard for us. That's on our checklist now, is wall hung toilets. The backside of them, pretty much no matter where they are, inside wall, outside wall, whatever, we're always putting a piece of 20 gauge sheet metal on the backside
I
of
need to
that.
add that to our list. Can you write that down for me?
I will.
Wall
I can
hung
remember
toilet tank protection. I think it should come standard from Gaboret
It really
or
should.
from Kohler or whoever makes those, because
Is that how you say it, Gaboret?
it looks like Gerberet. And
That's
I'm
how
pretty
I always said it.
I'm pretty sure they pronounce it Gaboret. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. That sounds very European
Now I'm
to me.
really worried that I've been saying it wrong.
Gerberet.
I like to see both of you
Guy
worry
Barrett.
about that.
Yeah.
You're not
I think
sure?
it's pronounced Gaboret.
I'm just gonna point at it from now on and go, "This company? Can we get it from this company?" So that I don't have to say it.
Exactly.
Now, the other one that I am like very upset with myself on, I have I think 4 curtain rods pulling out of the wall in my house.
Yeah.
That's another
Advanced
good one.
framing, curtain rods. Like, first of all, I didn't consider at all
I
that
would
we were going to
never.
put up curtains at my house.
I would have never thought about
Like,
that.
And like within a week of us moving in, one of my kids had ripped one out of the wall.
Wow.
And it was just like, oh, well, this is going to be a problem.
That's really
I'm
frustrating.
considering, and my wife was like, I don't want you doing patches, and like she's upset that it's happening, but she also doesn't. She thinks that I can't patch drywall, even though she doesn't know that I've already patched some, and she didn't. She doesn't. She can't see it.
Fantastic.
We
She
have
doesn't-
yet to have an episode that he doesn't confess something.
I'd also
that if his
be-
wife ever watches these
I'd be willing to bet
episodes,
that Rebecca is not an Unbuilded podcast listener.
I patched a doorknob
She's in the
hole
math business.
that I made while she was out of town, and it's where she should be able to see it, and she doesn't know. But because we lived in a house that had textured walls before, she thinks that I'm bad at drywall.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Because there's no patching sand drywall texture.
So hard.
So like I'm thinking that like if I can just get her to go out of town for like a week vacation,
Good to go.
I could patch all of them, put in
Yes.
blocking. I could do a lot and mount everything, and then just wait and see if she ever notices.
That's fantastic.
It might just have to be like I have to do it when we're out of town together and let somebody else come and fix it or something.
Probably.
otherwise it's curtains for you. But
Oh,
That was good.
Dad joke. That, was excellent.
Fantastic. But those are the big ones for me. The curtains thing at my personal house has actually changed the way that we're doing it.
How
for
do you
clients,
fix
too.
that though? I mean, that's not. I mean, when it comes to window coverings, there's so many options: outside
Yeah.
mount, inside mount. Like, how do you? I'm
We have to
curious.
have
How do you
an-
even checklist for that?
We have to
frankly?
have an interior designer checklist before we do it, and then it only works for the first clients.
the one thing you
Or
know
the
that
first use.
new occupants are going to do is they're going to change the way your windows work by putting up some kind of window
Yeah.
covering.
I mean, the best thing is you put in pockets, and you know,
And you have to think about
and
it.
then everything happens up inside there. But I mean, that's a
Pockets are so expensive,
that's an
man.
expensive
We're doing
endeavor.
them on a job right now, and I swear it's tens of thousands of dollars to get pockets done and correct.
Yeah.
By the time you pay the finish carpenter, by the time you get the trusses correct, all that stuff, it is just the most expensive detail. You better really want those
cool, though.
pockets.
It
It's
is really
super
cool.
no doubt about it. Well, Peter and I recorded a video today on a kind of a short video on what builders need to know about mold. Peter had 5 great, very concise points on mold for builders. Go check out that video in the future if the timing works
It'd be
right.
in the past.
But one thing that Peter said that I thought was really smart was it's not that you can't build a modern house mold free. It's that you just need everything to be very top of the line when it comes to WRB, flashings, parapets, subs, materials, everything's got to be top notch, and you got to spend the money for a top notch builder, for a top notch everything, envelope consultant to get it right when you have very little forgiveness built into the house. So that kind of is an interesting side note to what you're talking about, which is, you know, checklists and pockets. The more modern the house, the less things you have to hide, the more you got to think about it, right? And your house is, I would consider, if not modern, at least transitional. In my house, I kind of think of as being on the traditional side of transitional, a little more traditional than a little more modern, but not really a traditional house either, if that makes sense.
No,
I don't think it does.
No, I've seen
I think
this
you
house.
got lost in
I
the
think it's-
nomenclature.
Okay, maybe I did. My point is, though, like, I have crown molding at my house in a bunch of places.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I've got things that could be hidden, whereas you don't as much.
Yeah,
You don't have a lot
I
of
don't.
trim. Like, your staircase is just a freestanding metal staircase. I've got, you know, skirt boards and other things to hide.
Yeah.
Which means the more trim you have, the more ability you have to hide the lack of blocking, let's say, or whatever. Now, when you have less trim, there's less forgiveness in the house, which means your framing needs to be absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
That's when we start telling people, look, you got to go to LSLs in this house.
Yeah.
There's raking light coming from these walls. We can't just use regular 2x4s. We need the really expensive 2x4s.
Yeah.
Everything just gets exponentially more expensive.
I thought this conversation was going to go towards more to like the building science checklist, and I'm working on a project right now where we are discussing whether to use Erab Barrier open cavity or to do it after the drywall goes up.
Oh, that's a fascinating.
And it was all about
Discussion.
well, what needs to get done before we put that up. And my two perspectives are the way that the Erab Barrier sealant adheres to framing and sheathing, structural sheathing, and whatever's penetrating is very different than what happens at the drywall. And my concern is that the drywall, since it's made out of dust, it's a bond break for the sealant. So if there's a bunch of dust around all the cutout outlets and stuff and light switches, that the sealant's not going to adhere in a durable way because of that dust. And the answer came back, yes, but we can vacuum around all the openings before we do this to improve that situation, which some Erab Barrier contractors do. And the other perspective was that if you do the Erab Barrier at open cavity, there are so many trades that come afterwards and drill holes through that they'd rather do the Erab Barrier at the drywall because
All the poking holes.
all
is
the
done.
poking holes is already done. I never thought about that before.
So, where is the air control layer? Is it the sheathing?
It's the exterior sheathing.
So then I would say the best time to do it is pre-drywall post-installation.
Pre-drywall, post.
But I guess that actually, that's not true.
Well,
That'll only be if the house has spray foam in it.
Yeah.
There's no reason to not just do it before installation, but after the mechanical contractors have been there.
Well,
Right?
that's sort of
They
an
can't-
in-between situation, but
Yeah.
then you got to sequence that. But it was an interesting conversation about, is this a pre-drywall checklist thing? Or, because the counter to this is, if there are holes that got missed, you're not going to be able to plug those from you're not
Sure.
going to seal them on the outside because it's going to seal to the inside. So it's an important question to look at. I think asking the question is more important than which one you choose.
That's
Just
fascinating.
do it.
Yeah.
I'd never heard your point of that Erab Barrier doesn't stick great to dusty surfaces. And so if you're sealing between your cut drywall
Yeah.
and your electrical outlet, let's say, is that as long of a bond for this kind of aerosolized micro caulking, which is kind of how I explain Erab Barrier.
Yeah, I was trying to
than-
get some wing nut testing going on this because I think that we do need to know more about all the different materials to which that sealant needs to stick.
Mhm.
And I've talked to Erab Barrier about this.
But in general, my experience tells me that latex caulk doesn't stick great to the cut side of drywall. So why would Erab Barrier work any better there?
Well, it's a pretty aggressive acrylic sealant, but I'm concerned about if there's loose dust Now, if it's a clean cut or you vacuumed, that's a better chance of getting a bond than if it's full of dust, because the dust is clearly a bond break. But I don't know the answer to this question, even though I've tried to do some research on it.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Loose Dust would be a good album name too. By the
That
way.
would be a good album name.
Loose dust.
So
write that
I
down.
think we could roll this what things get missed in pre-drywall checklist. I'm pivoting to not what we talked about in our pre-planning conversation, just into a like, what gets missed in pre-construction? What things do you see from a consulting standpoint where builders are like going to construction that you go, hey, have you guys not thought about the fact that you're going to have a mechanical room to put conditioning into this building? Or what things have you taken a building to construction and then thought, well, crap, like how come we didn't think about that? There's nothing has jumped out to me, but I know that there is things in every single. For me, I feel like for the longest time, my number one was just like I never allowed enough money into any budget when I was starting out for the longest time, and that was a huge problem for me forever, for years. And then it was mechanical space, so that was why I brought it up. Like I never allowed enough mechanical space. Heck, when we were having a conversation recently with Nikki Kruger, I didn't allow enough mechanical space at my own house. And my house, because Erab Building's offices are there, is 4,300 square feet. And I talk about how I don't have mechanical space. That's a ridiculous thing, you know?
I just want to note that I think another great band name would be Mechanical Space.
Yeah,
Just saying.
it would be.
You know what's funny? When you said a list of things that I work with builders on, when I do design spec reviews, so I review the designs and then the specifications, and I have an outline for that, but it's all about the 4 continuous control layers. So it's a way of going through, and when they ask me if I will do a design spec review for them, I say, here's exactly how I'm going to do it. This is my list. If you have other things you want to add to that list, that's great, but this is what I use to get continuous 4 control layers. And on that list, I have other things not related to the enclosure, but the very first words out of your mouth were sizing of the mechanical closet, and I'm going to add that to the list when I go home tonight, because that's a great one. But I'm so wrapped up in the enclosure, that's a really, really good one. Are you leaving enough space for not only installing, but servicing the mechanical space? That's a really good one, Jim.
I want to back up one step and say something that I regularly make the mistake on this front is we allow clients to move forward on construction even if all selections haven't been made. And we kind of think of that as a benefit to the client, like, oh, don't worry,
We have
we'll
flexibility
figure it-
because
we have
it's
flexibility.
custom. It's
That's right.
custom. We're
That's right.
concierge. We'll take care of you.
But in fact, we're kind of putting the client's schedule or the client or what flexibility in front of the best for the building in a lot of respects. I have a buddy, you probably know him. You know the Risher Martin guys, Jeremy Risher.
I don't think so.
Jeremy Martin, pardon me, Chris Risher. Jeremy Martin and Chris Risher. They're a partnership here in town. You should definitely meet them if you don't know them. They're a fixed price builder who doesn't let anything go to construction without full job specs, full everything selected. Luke Mesger is a lot like this, where he won't start construction unless he knows the paint colors in the house.
Wow.
So he's very, very detailed on that, and we're always like, oh, you need more flexibility. Well, at my house, under construction, I didn't figure out what I was doing for low voltage until it was like time to install low voltage, right? And the problem with that was my low voltage guy drilled a bunch of holes that I didn't know were happening from the inside to the outside. Erab Barrier showed me, oh shoot, I missed like 4 or 5 of these holes that got drilled later, and Erab Barrier fixed it for me, quote unquote. But it just reminded me, like, I should have thought of that stuff ahead of time, thought about where it was running, had a specific conversation with him, like, I want a camera here, I want this wireless access point, I want this, this, and this. And I did, and we do that to our clients under the guise of flexibility, but in the long run, we're hurting ourselves and we're hurting the building by not pre-planning, all of our mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and low voltage. Not only just where are they going, but even the spec on those. Because when we pre-plan those and we know before the start of construction, like, here's the Kohler electronic shower valve I'm doing, then we can think about, okay, I need access to that valve later. I need to figure out an access panel. So let's make sure we don't design the closet in a way that doesn't allow me to put an access panel into the closet to get in there so that I could fiddle with this, change these parts, whatever. I'm trying to do things in my houses more and more, thinking, okay, if my kids take over the business and they remodel this house, how can I be smart so they can remodel it easily in 25 years, or change whatever part needs changed in 25 years. So I want to try and, as much as possible, have access to any joint in the plumbing, any shower valve, any whatever. And I think that's a whole frontier that I'm way behind on, and I need to do a lot of work on.
You know, it makes me think of there's a book by, I think it's Lindsay Haas Davenport, called the Scopes of Work program. Have we talked about this before?
No.
And she has a system for temporally sequenced trade contractors, and her whole mantra is the contractor who comes next has to sign off on the contractor that went before. So she has a before you start your work document that you have to sign, and when you end your work you have to sign, and it's through the entire construction sequence of the house. And she said what this means is that you can't go back and say, oh no, that wasn't those conditions weren't present there when I started, because her theory is, no, if you signed off on that for your buddy's work, you now own that. And in the beginning of the book she says you're going to have to fire at least one trade contractor, and you're going to have to fire at least one job site superintendent, because they're not going to want to do it. And she says there's only one way to do this. You either do the program with the pre and post checklist, or you don't. Well, for Building America, we took 6 of the high performance trades, because what she didn't have woven into that was performance testing. So Steve and Nathan and I, with Duncan Prawl at Ibicus, did this. But that might be interesting for you guys to look at, that you basically connect the work of one subcontractor to the other to get consistency of work, and make sure that stuff doesn't get missed as part of the pre-drywall checklist.
Interesting.
I think that what we do is so incredibly complex, and maybe this is me feeling pompous and just telling ourselves that what we do is complex.
Neither one of us jumped on that like, yeah, we should totally do that, Peter.
No, I'm shifting here.
Okay.
Thousands of parts with dozens or hundreds of people and team members, sometimes not speaking the same language and not understanding what the other people are on the site doing, and doing it outside and the elements, and like, I don't think that we ever get to a point where everything just goes smoothly and according to plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best that we can hope for is that things go simply, and that there aren't major headaches, and that and I'm not trying to sound defeatist here. I'm trying to sound realistic here.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on very well-run job sites. The modern build that Jackson Andrews guys had going. But that really well-run job site had a project manager and 2 assistants and a team of carpenters at it for years. Like, that, there's a difference between that and the thing that I get to do for my clients,
Right.
where it's just like, yeah, we can resolve a lot of these problems. A lot of these problems are resolved by manpower or team members and money.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what we get to do as an industry doesn't have those kinds of budgets.
Yeah.
And I have to say that her Scopes of Work program is targeted towards production home builders.
Mm.
Customs, a different
Yeah.
whole situation. But maybe if you took a look at it, you might find things within that
Yeah.
you could drop in.
But the systems, like
Yeah.
you're talking about, are the things that have made us miss less things over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I talked earlier about, like, one of my biggest problems in getting better was figuring out how to bid things more accurately, where I didn't feel like in the end we were hurt on budget because I didn't allow enough money on budget. now that we're to a point where it was like, it took me a long time to figure out, like, the more line items I put in the budget instead of HVAC, one of them is heating and cooling, one of them is ventilation, one of them is bath fans, one of them is dehumidifier.
Right.
As soon as you break that into 5 line items instead of 1 line item, that line item now costs 20% more.
Mm-hmm.
That 20% more is the actual cost that it should cost instead of the 20% less that you thought it might cost.
Yep.
Like, those little things, the second you add the detail into the proposal, now the proposal is more accurate. It took me forever to realize that that was my problem and that I needed to take the time. And so, like, having the system in place where my proposal asks for those details, my framework asks for those details, or my drywall checklist is 45 items for every house.
Do you guys share this type of stuff with your clients in the sense that you'd like to show them how you're different than your competition? Or is that like in the weeds, you don't want to share it with them?
I usually don't.
Yeah.
It's a mix. Some of those
I
things
would-
we acknowledge, but not most of them.
So I think the industry is changing a bit in that there is so much access to detailed information about home building that your clients have that I see a shift that sometimes they just get so overwhelmed and baffled that they're just looking for emotional relief from a builder that relieves them of worrying about all this stuff. But I think another part of it is they are looking for more detailed information about what you're doing because they can so easily go look for it themselves.
Yeah.
And it's kind of as if you could take a sort of a dangerous element of all this and maybe turn it into a positive. It's
Yeah.
very easy for me to talk about this because I don't build anything.
Yeah. Pete's risk is very small.
Right. Right.
Pete's biggest risk is somebody doesn't send the check on time.
Note to self. Get
Get the check. Get the
Get that
up
check in
front.
the mail.
The biggest rule in Pete's world is before you quote what your hourly rate is, check to see how big the house is.
That's a good rule. It's a very good rule.
Write that one down.
He's gonna write that one down too. So tell me if I'm wrong, Matt. If the takeaway here is the best we can hope for is to be better on every house.
I mean, that's always been my philosophy, Jake, is just try not to make the same mistakes again. And whether that mistake was a contract mistake, whether that mistake was a pre-drywall mistake, whether that mistake was an air sealing mistake, I think the best we can do is to try to make sure that we don't make those mistakes and ultimately make every house a little better than the last one. I mean, I know that's your secret to success is that, for the, 15 years I've known you, you've always upped your ante and upped your game on every single house. Not by lights and, not by leap years, but by steps. Mm-hmm. And I think if we all as an industry do that, we're going to be in a very different place. And we already are, I feel like so many builders, I mean, you're such a shining example in your marketplace. I can think of 3 or 4 builders that were watching you and going, oh, wow, Jake's doing this. I need to do it. And now there are many Jakes in your marketplace, right? And you've totally changed the game in that market. Not that there still aren't some builders doing really poor quality. There are, but you've elevated the game big time in that marketplace. And I think you're seeing that happen throughout the country. And that's such a great thing. I mean, Austin is a very different town than when I moved here 20 years ago. And the builder game here has really gone to a very high level. And
I
I'm
agree.
really, I'm not the reason for that. I'm just a part of that. I can think of 10 other builders
there's a
that
big
do
influence there,
a
though, too.
great job, that do a better job than my company, are more organized, that build a better house. I mean, there's a lot going on in this town, and I think that's happening across the country. There are some markets though that are still very 20 years ago in their building science knowledge and their ability to build both a watertight and an airtight house. So that's the reason why we do the UnBuild podcast, right?
Yeah.
And my biggest piece of advice is when you think that there's a system that you could put into place that is going to be helpful, by the time you think about it and you think it's going to be helpful, chances are it actually is going to be helpful. And
Great point.
take the time, because the longer you think about it without it doing it, it's not going to be helpful to just think about it. Like, once you have it, it will help you every time you need it. And it took me a long time to come up with that pre-drywall checklist, but I bet it saved me thousands of dollars. in the 6 years since I came up with it.
Yep.
So now you can take those thousands of dollars you spent and hire me.
There you go.
Right. Exactly.
For what, an hour and a half?
That ought to do it.
Thousands of dollars per hour.
That will wrap us up today because Steve's not here to tell a horrible dad joke at the end of the podcast.
Is that what Steve's I know he's got
that's
a pile
what he's gotten
of them.
into recently.
Yep. We had a listener write and say how much he really enjoys and how much his wife will listen to the whole podcast because they know that
There's
Steve
gonna
has
be
a
a
joke
really
in
bad
there.
dad.
I think Steve wrote that.
Yeah, I
Email
think
to
it's,
us.
he's sending emails under false pretenses now. So, Matt, thank you for
Thanks,
joining
Matt.
us
Thank you,
today.
guys.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
for hosting us, if you will.
Absolutely.
Thanks for jumping in.
Until next time, have a good day.